Every day, I walk up to my hill, and I plant my feet firmly on planet Earth. And I ground myself down into the core, and then back up into past the stars and into the places that I can't physically see, but I know they exist. And I raise my hands and I shout out, I am infinite. So how did I get here? After all, I'm just an ordinary mortal, and I'm living an extraordinary life. This is a story of my personal journey, and I want to share it with you, and my only wish is that it inspires you somehow in some way. By profession, I'm a marketer. My clients think that I run into this dark little cave and I create fancy little ad copy and logos and brochures and TV and radio commercials. But the truth is, my job is to make my clients money. And so I do this. I start this process by building the client a car. But not just any car. No, this is a very modern car. This car is sleek, and it's fast, and the tires refuse to leave the pavement. And every bell and whistle necessary for the journey is in that car. And when that client sits in that seat, he feels really comfortable. And so I jump in the passenger seat, and we go for a ride. And we go down a long, straight road at the very beginning. And it might be a little bit boring, but it starts to get very exciting very quickly. And all of a sudden, he starts to go through some turns, and the road starts to go up a hill. And all of a sudden, the turns and the bends get steeper and steeper, and the road gets steeper and steeper. And eventually, we're climbing up a mountain. Now, there's a couple of bends in the road that the client gets a little concerned about, but that's my job, because I'm right there in the passenger seat with him, helping him all the way along. And then something happens. He starts to really enjoy this car. Except there's one hitch. This car is invisible. You see, I am in marketing, and I don't sell real cars. I don't sell anything intangible, in fact. What I sell, what my job is to help my client realize the dreams and visions for his business. And the only way that I can do that and sell the intangible is to drop every personal boundary and belief system that I have and walk into his business with a complete and utter open mind. And the only way, once we've decided to work together, is to make it work. I have to convince him to do exactly the same. I have to convince my client to push a lot of boundaries and drop old belief systems that no longer serve them. So when I heard that TEDx, the theme of TEDx was pushing boundaries, I thought, oh, this is really great. So I went on to the website and I started to look at all the TEDx speakers from the past that have already talked about pushing boundaries. And it was fabulous. There was actually real cars and real advances in science and technology and everything. And all these people had done all this stuff. But what was missing for me was that the stuff that they were doing was just a byproduct. It was just the end result of something else, bigger and greater than they are. Now you might think, and some people might think, you know, April, that's great. You know, those guys can push boundaries, so you can push boundaries, but I've never pushed a single boundary in my entire life. And I don't even ever intend to push a single boundary. Because quite honestly, I really like my comfort zone, and I'm staying right here where I belong. But what if I shared with you a story that you might not realize? It's a story about you. And whether or not you know it, you have already pushed some of the largest boundaries a human being on this planet will ever go through. Let me take you on a little personal journey to your birth. There you are, all nice and warm and comfortable in a little sack of fluid, 36.6 degrees Celsius, warm and balmy. But you start to outgrow And so it's time to head out, and that's exactly what you do. The first thing to hit the cold air of that delivery room is your head and your wet body. And it doesn't matter how warm they make that delivery room. You have just come from a balmy Florida Saturday to a freezing cold Alberta winter. And you then become the first to start the assault to your senses. And then, oh my gosh, something's touching you. You've got hands all over you. This is not normal. And they're cleaning out every orifice on your head. They're cleaning out your ears and your nose. And then finally, they clean out your mouth. And the first thing you do is you open your mouth and you take your first breath. And in goes that cold air again. And out goes that cold air. It scares you. It really scares you. But unfortunately, breathing is part of life. And so you breathe again. And you exhale again. And it scares the daylights out of you again. So you make this noise. And the noise scares you. So then you make it second exhale, you make an even louder noise. And by the third exhale, you're screaming your little head off. And everybody in the delivery room is looking at you and smiling. Not that you would know this, because you still can't see anything, and they're still cleaning you up. And then they wrap you in a nice little warm, tight blanket. And what's the first smell? Oh, nice, chlorine bleach. Good, good. But then finally, it doesn't take very long, and you hear those familiar voices again. Mom and Dad. Ah, yes, this is where you just want to stay. Please don't ever take me away ever again. I'm just going to sit here and just get over the massive assault to my personal boundaries that I've ever had to endure. And then they take you away again. So you have just pushed the largest percentage of personal boundaries that you may ever push again. But you're all here. You all survived it. So my question to you is, did you keep it up? Let's look now at the next stage beyond your birth. This is your childhood. Let's look at childhood on a linear line. At this end is the perfect childhood. At this end, not so perfect childhood. And every human being on this planet has a space somewhere along this line. And you're probably thinking, well, I had a pretty good childhood, so I kind of put myself maybe about here. Not a perfect childhood. Nobody has a perfect childhood. So I'm going to put myself somewhere in here. And then some of you might be thinking, our family was rich, but my dad was a jerk, so I'm going down here. My childhood is right here. I had the perfect childhood. Right at this end, that's me waving hello, hello. My mother was a chain smoker, a severe alcoholic, and a prescription drug taker. And the fact that I'm standing on this stage is a miracle. She was angry and had great difficulty reconciling her past. She would spend evenings, every evening, yelling and screaming, and I, from a very young child, would spend my time in my bed crying myself to sleep every night. Every night. And then finally, at the age of six, I had had enough. And I said, something has to change. But then I realized that there was this event coming along called Woodstock, and I thought, I've got $15 in change, and I could just go hop on a bus and go hang out with the enlightened ones. But unfortunately, Woodstock was still a little ways away, and I had to deal with it, and I had to deal with it in the here and now. And so I rolled over, and I asked for help. And I sat there very quietly. And I started to realize that this had absolutely nothing to do with me. Absolutely nothing. And that I could not control the situation, but I could control my thoughts about the situation. And you know how you have those epiphanal moments through your life? That was one that I will never forget in my life, and I have had them ever since. My dad, however, was my rock. He was the kindest and most gentlest person I have ever known on this planet, and everywhere he went, he attracted people. So who do you think was my greatest teacher? Can we learn things through the negative? Well, I believe that that's what the negative is for. I believe that absolutely, indeed, we do learn things through the negative. And that when negative things happen to you, it's not an inconvenience. It's not to inconvenience you at all. It's to grow you. And so my mom took her life on her 66th birthday, on her 66th year, on my 33rd birthday. And Dad and I were the only ones present to put her in the ground. And I bent down, and I took the little vial of ashes, and I dropped it into the sleeve, into the ground, and I put the tiny little plaque over it. And I just sat there, and I said, I need some help. And I waited again, and I looked up, and in front of me was the largest ornamental cherry tree I had ever seen in Vancouver. This thing rivaled anything that I have in spruce trees on my property now. And it was an ethereal pink color, and it smelled really good, and I just stood up, and the weight of 33 years lifted from my shoulders. Because you got to realize that for 33 years, my mother was the reason that I was successful. She wasted her life. I made something from my life. She called me stupid every day. I made sure that was never going to be an option for me. But now she was gone, and there was nothing more that I could do, no more excuses that I had, and I had to be on my own. And so I stood there, 33 years, just lifted from my shoulders like that. Gone. And there isn't a day in my life that I don't pay gratitude and thanks to her for the gifts that she gave me. But it didn't end. My mother was the first to go over a 4-month period where I lost almost everybody in my entire family on both sides, mother and father's side. So from the beginning of April to the beginning of August, my dad was the last to go. And at his eulogy, I stepped down, and the man that I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with came up to me and he said goodbye. He said, I don't think I can spend the next few years with you because, quite honestly, I have no idea who you are going to become. And he moved all my stuff into storage and sent me the bill, and I never saw him again. And so I immersed myself in my work because I was good at it. Marketing was great. It gave me a fabulous distraction, and I poured myself into it. But I stumbled through the rest of the decade. Most of the 90s was quite a wash for me. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I believed. I totally had no supports underneath my feet. Fabulous place to be. And so I realized that there was not a refuge from this ride. And it was only years later that I was also diagnosed with an incurable disease. And I lay there in that hospital bed, and I would unplug all the cords from my arms, and I would walk down to this long hallway where they had these glass doors. And I would just sit cross-legged, and I would just rock back and forth. And I just said, why? Why me? But I kept getting lights out. And so after enough weeks and after enough drugs, and I was clinically blind from them, I went down to that door one night when there was no one around. And this time I did not ask for help. This time I did a complete and utter surrender. And if anybody in this audience has ever done this, you will understand how incredibly powerful it is. I sat there and I thanked in such gratitude for all the things that have ever happened to me in my life, even what was happening to me at the moment. And I swore that I would do that for the rest of my life. And I also swore, made a vow to myself personally, no one else, just me, that I would never again be attached to the results, because it didn't matter, because anything negative was still good. And I left that hospital several days later, and let me tell you, leaving the hospital with a condition that I had is not easy, because when everybody stood at the door and watched me walk out, they realized, don't push that girl, if she wants to go, let her go. But they didn't think I would survive, but they didn't know me. And then several days later, I walked all the way home, half blind. I walked all the way home. 2 days later, the phone starts ringing. And my world has never been the same. Opportunities started coming to me that I think most people only realize once in a lifetime, and I was fielding them all. I got to do projects and things that I had never in my whole life believed that I could ever do. And I was starting to connect with all these amazing people, and it was the whole ride was fascinating. And I started to think, well, maybe there's just more to this planet than just, being connected to your child or your husband or maybe some of your friends. You know how you think about your kid and all of a sudden the phone rings and it's her? What if we're all connected? What if we're all connected, every one of us, and that every one of us has the ability to download all the same great things that anybody else does on this planet? And then I started asking even really bigger questions, like I'd stand up and I'd look at the stars and I'd go, what else is out there? There's got to be more out there, because for one thing, the sky's the limit doesn't apply to me anymore. So I stroked the word limit off my vocabulary. That was gone. And then I started looking at coincidences, and I started to realize that maybe there weren't any coincidences on this planet, and that coincidence was just a word for people who couldn't look any further. And so I stroked that off my list too. And I stroked a whole pile of words off my list, a lot of negative words, and a lot of stuff that just didn't apply to me anymore. And I started to realize that I was limitless in boundaries, and no more did I push any boundaries because I got rid of them all. There was nothing to push anymore. And so everything opened up, and I started to ask even bigger questions, like, where do my thoughts go? Do my thoughts just end with me, or do they go somewhere? What if they actually connect and create the energy in the world, and they make change? So I wanted to be a lot more conscious about my thoughts, because thought equals energy equals action equals manifestation in matter. And so I started to change who I was inside. And I started to realize that outside didn't matter. Nobody could change the outside, but you can change the inside. And power doesn't come to you, power comes through you. And I started to look at the planet. And one day I stood outside, and I'm standing on this planet, and for just a small moment, I had this vision that I was so incredibly tiny and insignificant. Because here I am, standing on this big organic mass, hurling through space at, I have no idea what speed. And then I shifted that. And I realized that the planet is actually very small when you look at Jupiter and the rest of the planets. And this is just a galaxy we know. What about the galaxies that we don't know? We don't know anything about this. We think we know so much on this planet. We don't know anything yet. And I started to ask the really big questions again, because I know that a question, for every question that you ask, has an answer. It's like a double-sided coin, because you cannot frame a question if the answer doesn't already exist. And so I started to ask even bigger questions. And I got really excited about this whole Earth thing. And it's like, what happens to you when you finally start to realize that you are not alone and you can do absolutely anything you want on this planet at any time? All you have to do is just go out and do it. And so, You'll run up to your hill, and you'll stand on your own personal hill, and you'll ground yourself through the earth, and you'll go back up and way past the stars to that place that you know exists, but you can't physically see it, and you'll raise your hands up, and you'll shout to the world, I am infinite.